You're listening to Healing Voices Project, where we share stories and the latest information from people who fight addiction every day. I'm Mike Torville, your host and author of Voices from the Fallen. Thank you for listening, for following, and most of all, for sharing with people you care about. Make your voice count too. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us back again here at Healing Voices Project. We're glad to have you. And today we have a special guest all the way from Canada, a little farther away than our normal guests, but we're really glad to have Chuck LaFlange here with us. And Chuck has his own incredible story of recovery after many, many years. And he also now runs a podcast called Ashes to Awesome podcast with Chuck LaFlange. And one of the things I've gotten to know talking to Chuck is just how passionate he is. And I could talk to Chuck for hours and hours and hours, and as you'll see as we get going, engaged in our conversation, he's a busy guy. He has a podcast that runs 6 days a week, Memorial Monday, Topic Tuesday, RBK Kaleidoscope Wednesday, Just the Tips Thursday, Family Friday, and then, of course, the Weekend Ramble. So, Chuck, thank you for joining us.
You're well. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I don't know how you keep up because 6 days a week is a heavy load.
I got to be honest. We've moved away from the 6 day a week format recently.
Yeah.
Because it's unsustainable. It's just not. It's not something a person can do realistically. Once I went to video as well as audio, we had to move away from that. So now I do 3 for sure episodes a week.
Yeah.
The Weekend Ramble, Kaleidoscope Wednesday, and then the third episode is static, and that could be any one of the other. It could be a Memorial Monday or a Family Friday or whatever, right? So yeah.
Do you? I'm going to ask a stupid question, Chuck. But do you ever run out of things to say?
Never. No. I just don't. Right. The moment we switched from a recovery thing where it wasn't all about recovery stories, and we started focusing on the families, the content became unlimited. Right. And as you know, because your whole brand is basically around the families, right? As best I understand it so far. There's just so much. There's so much to talk about, right? So yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And then, but I really give you credit because it's a lot. Now I know with the podcast that you do, and it's your full time. You're just at it all the time. It's a lot to carry on. We talk about so many topics. You talk about the families a lot. You talk about stigma, and I know we're going to get into that. And I think
we are.
Yeah, we are. And I think and all the changes, because you've been in recovery now for how long?
In recovery?
How long are you in recovery? Yeah.
It'll be a year next month. Yeah.
A year next month.
Like 3 weeks away. Three weeks and a day away from a year for me. Yeah.
And how long were you actively using?
25 years.
25
give or take.
Years.
Yeah. There's peaks and valleys, right?
Yeah.
Like it's there was a lot of high functioning years in there, and then a lot of not so much, right? I've hit a few rock bottoms over the years, and but I never attempted recovery until almost 2 years ago now. It was the first time that I ever attempted to be sober, and then it took me a better part of a year to go from attempting to be sober to getting sober, right? So, right. Yeah.
Wow. Well, we're going to talk about your program. I know we're going to do that, but to give it some context, why don't we talk about how your story started? Where did this all begin? You were a younger man back then. So
That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Often you hear the stories of a crazy traumatic childhood and all of those things. And one of the things that's funny about myself is, we grew up, pretty normal. I had a twin brother up until I was 12, and then I had a baby brother after that. We moved out to the country when I was 10 or 11 years old, and I could dirt bike and swim and horseback ride, and because we lived on a private lake, like I could do all these things in an afternoon, and often did. We had a really crazy, we certainly weren't wealthy by any standard. We were definitely lower middle class, but Mom did the best with what she had. We never felt, we never felt like we were, well, we did. We felt like we were without, but we were normal poor kids anyway, right? So I had all the normal things, but then I left at 14 because I knew everything, of course, as you do at that age, and from that point, I just slowly, very slowly turned into a life of insanity and chaos, right? I ended up in jail a few times in juvie, right, as a minor.
Teenager. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
When I was 18, it was a month after my 18th birthday that I went to jail for the first time, to big boys jail, and I was there for 7 months. I learned, I met a lot of people there, and I learned a lot of things about stuff. And by the time I was 18,
can I ask you, what did you go to jail for when you were 18?
That was break and enter, fraud, and break and enter and fraud was at the 18th, right? Which was my typical. A lot of break and enters, always shops and like gas stations and restaurants and that type of thing. I was never into the houses like other guys were. It would always creep me out to be in somebody else's house, and I always thought, what would I do if I found somebody in my home, right? But so we stuck to what I thought was a higher moral ground, by doing restaurants and gas. But at the end of the day, it's somebody's hard-earned business. They're small businesses, because they're the ones without alarms. Right. So you might as well be breaking into somebody's home. Knowing what I do now and being an entrepreneur a few times over the years, you might as well just break into somebody's home if you're going to break into their business, because it's a crap thing to do. So
still personal.
Yeah, very, very personal. Very personal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So
So you ended up in jail, and this was, you were how long were you there, and what?
I was 18 by a month, and I was being sentenced for my first adult crime, right? And then when I got out, I just started hanging out with, the same old people, really, at the end of the day. The thing about me is I was an entrepreneur. So if you mix that with somebody who's doing drugs, like I tried cocaine when I was 17, but 18 really is when I started to get into it. 19, I tried crack, and really tried crack anyway, got into it. And that was my first true love. Is what that was. That was horrible, right? But even after, like a year after I started that, I hit my first rock bottom. I woke up one day, I got no power, I got no friends. What the hell happened to all my friends? I've got, my family's not talking. What have I done? And I stopped doing crack, and this is a ridiculously relative thing to say. I just started snorting coke, right? So. And that's, again, if you're not in the lifestyle, that's a ridiculous statement to hear. And I appreciate that to the listener right now, who listens to this and goes, what the hell, right? But it was, if you're in the lifestyle, it makes more sense if you have some context to it. And for 20 years, 19 years and 9 months, I stayed off that pipe. And I was somewhat high functioning. I had businesses. I had a couple different moving companies. I had a temp agency for a little while. I opened some vape shops. You had
businesses, meaning you ran these businesses?
I ran businesses, yeah, absolutely. Wow. Yeah. I opened some vape shops when that was a new thing, like the vaping for, we had, in the course of a year, I had 4 stores in 4 cities, right? Like it just went nuts. Like I did enjoy some success in whatever job I had in those times. I did well at, very well at, I was always in charge of my surroundings, most certainly. I saw promotion after promotion. Everything I did, I did well. But I always liked dope, right? And if you combine an entrepreneurial spirit with somebody who likes their dope, you get a drug dealer. So other people want to or have to steal to supply their habits. Me, I just sold more dope. And I was better than the guy stealing because I was just buying the drugs to people who were stealing. The math doesn't check out, right? So I was no better than anybody, but I thought I was for a long time. And eventually I tried crack again, and that was the beginning of the end, right? The moment I tried, like 19 years and 9 months, and the moment I picked that up, I was done. It was all over for me, right? I made up for a lot of lost time there, and things got really bad really fast. I experienced violence. I should say, the drug scene has changed dramatically in the last 10 years in a way that if you've been sober for even 5 years or more, definitely say 7, you really have no idea what it's like out there anymore. It is with the onset of fentanyl and meth.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've got one drug that people will do absolutely anything for. They're physically and psychologically addicted to it like nothing ever has ever been. It's a heroin on steroids, and that's fentanyl, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then you have meth, another drug that'll keep people awake for 2 weeks at a time doing it. So it's this perfect storm of chaos has hit the scene in a way now where violence. I'd gone 20 years of being in the drug game in one form or another, and quite often high up in the game, without ever experiencing violence of any kind. I had never once was worried. I was never nothing for 20 years. And then fentanyl and meth came on the scene. And in the course of 2 years, I went through unspeakable things. I was kidnapped. I was robbed. I was held hostage. I was tortured. I was like, the list of extreme violence went from 0 to countless overnight with the onset of meth and fentanyl into the drug scene. Right? Yeah.
Oh, so you were a victim of some of this violence.
I was
kidnapping.
Absolutely, yeah.
And why was that? Because you had something they wanted, or what was the?
Yeah. I was being robbed. Right. Yeah. Always. Right.
Money,
Is that
drugs,
what it was? Yeah. And when I didn't have it, the being held hostage part, that was they were trying to get me to set up my drug dealers. Right. So it was always something that I had, whether it was my connection or my actual dope or money. And it was horrible. It was like the trauma that I faced in that last 2 years of active addiction was some of the worst. It still affects me. I'm still working through that trauma now, of course, right? Like it hasn't been that long. Yeah.
Well, and I'm thinking, you've survived 25 years of your active use and addiction. Yeah. Do you think if things were the way they are now back then, you would have gone through the 25 years alive?
Oh, I'd be dead or sober. Yeah. Right. To live now through 25 years of what's happening, I don't think is a thing. I don't think a person does that, especially with fentanyl, right? We're seeing deaths now skyrocket with fentanyl because people have been addicted to it. It's been around for 5 or 6 years of real, as a street drug. And now the dose that kills you, or the dose that gets you high, kills you, right? Because people's tolerances is built up so high. Then you add in benzos, the cuts that they're using nowadays, benzodiazepines or, Xanax and that type of thing to it, which, Narcan has no effect on. And people are taking more and more. Now they're really starting to die. Now we're really starting to see the effects of fentanyl as a street drug, right? Which is awful.
And xylazine, too.
Right? Because it wasn't bad enough, right?
And it's horrible.
Right? That's a new thing to me. So xylazine wasn't in it when I was around that, right? When I was around that, Narcan still worked on everybody, right? I Narcan my fair share of people. This xylazine crap, and that's the stuff that causes the open wounds, right? The festering wounds and in people. I believe that's the
it's like
right?
a leprosy almost.
Yeah, right. How did you take the worst drug ever to hit the world in the history of ever and make it worse, right? What brand of evil did that, right? And it's messed up, man. It is, so yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, in your years, I'm jumping back a little bit, and if I think about that kind of time, 25 years, especially like you said, the last 2 or so were the most severe. In that time, your family, your friends, your relationships, so much has changed. People evolve, kids grow up. How has that affected your family and friend relationship over that amount of time?
Wow. So,
yeah.
Well, the family relationship was rocky, right? I separated myself from the family, out of guilt and shame. So I wasn't around stealing from everybody and those things that happen. Yeah. I would just go off grid for a year, 2, 3 years at a time, right? Nobody would hear from me, which is almost worse, I think. I don't know. I think both both ways of being an addict to your family suck. I don't think worse is the right term, right? I think it's really crappy in its own way, right? The families, what they have to go through. So, my mom, literally 3 years, we didn't talk, right? For right up until I decided, it was time to, just before I decided it was time to get sober, right? Those last 3 years of it, we really didn't talk, right? So I think that's, again, worse isn't the right word, but it's its own kind of hell for a family. My friends, now here's an interesting part. I left the city where I am now is Calgary. I left Calgary to go to Saskatchewan, which is the next province over, 15 years ago, and to do better. And I did better for a little while, but I was still using, so ultimately that catches up to you. And then for most of that 15 years, I was, screwing things up pretty bad, and I just went off. Most of my friends back here never would have heard from me. When I got back, though, the coolest thing happened. When I got back and my friends from 20 years previous found out I was in town and sober, doors opened, phone calls came, messages came, and I am blessed. I am truly blessed.
Wow. Yeah.
Most of the people I talk to today, I was friends with 20 years ago, right? The vast majority of them. Most of the people on the Ashes to Awesome team, I was friends with 20 years ago, right? It's been this amazing, I am blessed. I really am, right? I'm fortunate that way. My family has embraced, I got all that back in an insanely fast amount of time, right? And it was crazy because the last time I saw one of my very closest friends, Kyle, the last time I saw him, I was holding his oldest son in a picture, right? Or I guess, no, it'd be his daughter, who's like a year younger. But I was holding her in a picture the last time I saw them. And I come back to town, and she's 20. And she's like a model, and I'm like, wow, what's happened, know? But they like, their whole lives have happened, but my life didn't happen, right? My life's just starting, really, at the end of the day now, which is, that part can be a little frustrating sometimes, and, I have to put that back in check sometimes, but, I wasted a lot of years. But I'm blessed with a community now that is just, it's stellar. I couldn't be, could be more grateful for them, all of them. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. That's the thing. And you're very fortunate, right? One, that you're here and alive to talk about it.
Yeah.
Number one. And number two, that you've been able to renew those friendships, because a lot of times they're sometimes severed irreparably, but that's great. That means a lot. And then, I was thinking about it with your businesses that you said you were successful. And just think had you not gone into addiction.
Oh man, I try not to be honest with you. I try really hard not to, right?
But you have to.
I tell myself now that, what I'm doing, I can be successful at. What I'm, here's the thing. If all the drug addicts in the world sobered up at the same time, the rest of you would be screwed because you'd all be working for us, right? Do you have any idea what it takes to maintain a $500 a day habit and to survive? And to, do you have the amount of ingenuity, tenacity, commitment it takes to do those things, right? We'd have world hunger, global warming. We'd know where all the socks went that went into the dryer. That's all nonsense compared to the crap that we have to try, to what it's like to be an addict, especially in today's, changed landscape, right? So
it's a different level of your mind that most of us don't ever have to get to.
Right. You can't, and again, though, the level, the tenacity it takes to supply a habit like that, the daily grind, the hustle that you have to have, right? To just, and keeping in mind, mine was crack, and I don't mean just crack, because psychologically it's addicting. But to somebody who would say an opioid addiction, right? To them, they get up in the morning, and like as soon as they wake up, they slept, their life sucks because now they're dope sick, and they're in pain, and they're in horrible pain. If you've ever seen somebody who's dope sick, now they have to get up and solve that problem every single day. Can you imagine if that person was able to put that kind of energy into selling cars or whatever,
running
kind
a
of life.
business, right?
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah, right. So again, like if it ever happens, if they come up with a pill that cures addiction, the rest of you are screwed because you're all going to be our minions. That's how that ends, right? You know. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I've seen some things like, oh, how did they think of that? How did that? Yeah, but yet there's a way. Wow,
You know?
wow.
I remember. Here, I'll give you a funny
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Stab lock breakers. You know what a breaker in your home, right? The factory burns down a
Yep.
couple years ago or something like that, or they shut it down, or I'm not even sure what happened. But they became in very short supply. These stab lock breakers, right? This is just a few years ago now. People, like the addicts around me, were going, like a house would burn down. They'd be like jumping into that place before anybody had a chance. Like as soon as the fire was out, they boarded it up. Somebody would be in there with a crowbar. They'd pull it off. They'd go downstairs and they'd pull all these fucking breakers because they're worth money and they'd sell them to an electrician. Who thinks that? Right? But like somebody told them there's a
Right.
reduced supply of these, so they're going to go up in value. And all of a sudden, boom. Like who thinks of that stuff, right? You know, right? So
If
I
you don't
think
have
that
to.
supply demand thing has been sorted out in the meantime, but right? Right. Probably because it's people like that, really. You know,
I could use the word desperation, but desperation really sort of inspires
right?
ingenuity, doesn't it?
What is it? What is that? The need? There's a saying about invention. I don't. You know the one I'm talking
Laziness
about.
is
It's
the
a
mother of
cliche
invention,
about
or
it, yeah.
something like this. But I think this case, it's desperation.
Necessity's the mother of invention.
Inspires ingenuity.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Same thing, right? Same thing. Right?
That's
yeah.
it.
So
Yeah, exactly.
It's no small task to be an addict, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've gone through so much, and as you said too, and I think about this, the addiction now is so much more. Well, it's fatal to live through the years that you have, and it's talk about the Russian roulette. You get one dose of fentanyl that could be deadly, and that's why so many young people are now dying too soon. But yet, yet with all this knowledge, and this is what you're doing, what we're doing here, is to get the word out, to talk to people, to expose these things. Yet the deaths are still increasing, even with all this knowledge we have.
I don't understand how fentanyl. So I'll speak more about the drug landscape from somebody who's in it for so long.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be you were an up or you were a down. To put that in perspective, as somebody who was in the drug game most of my entire adult life, really, up until just now, for the most part, I had never seen heroin. I could count on one hand up until 4 years ago for sure, how many heroin addicts I had ever met. Yet I had been in the drug game my whole life because you were an up or you were down. The two sides would never have occasion to speak to each other, right? You just wouldn't. And it wasn't that I looked down at them or they looked down at me. We were two totally different worlds. And then all of a sudden, everybody was doing fentanyl. And it felt like the course of a month, maybe 3 months. The whole city where I was at, in Regina anyway, and I'm sure this was the same thing, continent-wide, worldwide, really, I imagine. Everybody was doing fentanyl. I don't know how it happened. There's some timing with COVID in there where COVID messed up, like COVID screwed up the drug market in ways that we could do a whole show about what it did to the drug economy. Yeah. But I know COVID had something to do with it. It had something to do with the drug economy and the whole supply demand, prices up, prices down. Fentanyl became really available all of a sudden, and it's gone down in price. When I got arrested a few years ago, in the city I was in, the going price was about $4,000 an ounce. Now well under $1,000 you can get an ounce for, right? Even in that, like way away from the coast, way away from the border city of Regina, for under $1,000 you can get an ounce of fentanyl. So the prices come way down. It's crazy. I don't understand how so many people that were up went to a down like that, right? And then, you've got it's something to do with meth in there as well. But it changed so fast, and I don't know why. And I believe the deaths are getting worse because tolerances keep going up. People are using more and more. Add in the benzos, add in the xylazines, whatever. I'm sorry if I said that wrong. And now it's, and again, like you said, the one and done guys, the kids who bought some ecstasy. We did a memorial episode. Harlan Forget, what was his name? The young guy, 30 years old, barely ever touched drugs. Now and again did some ecstasy, whatever, maybe smoked a joint here and there. Not a drug addict per se. Harlan Foray. His dad it was horrible. His dad was a heroin addict, sober for 4 years, with the help of his son Harlan, right? We're talking a 30-year-old kid who had the same job for 10 years. That's who Harlan was. Him and 3 of his buddies buy some ecstasy at a bar, go into the bathroom, crush it up, do a line, boom, 4 of them hit the floor. Just like that. Right? Like, what a horrible story. What a horrible, horrible story, right? And Joseph, he's still sober, and by the grace of God, he's still sober. Because that would put a lot of people, that would have driven him back into the throes of it, right? But that's just one story that's been repeated over and over and over again, right? Like you say, it's
I
awful.
think you're right. The tolerance, the accessibility, and the cost. I mean, the cost is so low. Accessibility, you can get it anywhere. I have 4 grandkids. 3 of them are teenagers, and they say, "Yeah, if you want it,
that must be terrifying.
You can get it in 20 minutes if you want it."
Yeah,
It is terrifying.
I don't have kids of my own, so it's I'm not thankful that I don't, because it's something that I missed out on for years of being a moron. But some days I am, so I don't have to worry the same way, right? It's, oh man, I can't imagine, right? Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's very hard, and there's a lot that you can't control. Obviously, they're out of your sight for a good 8 hours a day, whether in school or so on. Yeah,
and that brings up something that I do like to talk about, if you don't mind me kind of taking the conversation there.
Sure.
The families. So if you have a son or a daughter, and I get messages, Mike, I get messages all day, every day, from people who have kids or who are in it, and and what do I do, and mothers who want to share their stories and that type of thing. And I consistently say, there's not much you can do, but make sure that you're there. Keep the connections open, because connection is vital, right? Love them, let them know they're loved. Use the words "you are loved," right, which is a big part of our brand here. But if it was my kid, I don't know. I don't know that I wouldn't go handcuff him to a pipe in the basement. Right? Because what do you do? Right? Like, how do you, I don't know, right? Yeah.
When it's that close, sometimes rationality, logic doesn't always apply.
Yeah, right.
Right.
So, I've recently done some reels on that, and it just, what would I do? I don't know that. I don't know that, and one of the things that we're facing right now here is a big debate, is mandated treatment. Now, I don't know what that's like in your part of the world, if that's a thing, or coerced treatment, or whatever you want to call it, forced treatment. But something that we're really exploring here in Alberta, my province, is, do we say, because you are so far into addiction, and you check all the boxes for the Mental Health Act, right? All the things, if a schizophrenic walked in, they would check all the boxes that somebody who's got a really bad fentanyl addiction would say, for instance, and they would commit them to psychiatric care. But we don't do that for addiction because of the stigma, because of the fucking stigma. We don't do that, right? Instead, we say, no, addiction isn't something that we do that with, even though you check all the boxes. So go out and kill yourself slowly, or do whatever it is that you're doing. It's messed up, right? So that it's something that, it's a big debate here right now. I think our provincial government's about to come out with and drop a pretty big hammer that way. Actually, is kind of the sense that we're all getting, that we're going to have that soon. Right?
And
so,
I will say that I know you did a recent episode about forced treatment and a recent podcast you had. I was listening to that, so I'll say if the listeners want to tune into that, go to Ashes to Awesome podcast with Chuck LaFlange, and you'll find that episode because that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's a2apodcast.com, a2apodcast.com.
Number 2A podcast.
Yeah. Right. So.
Yeah, and I went through that, and you've got so many. So many topics you've covered.
We're at 174 now, I believe, right?
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
It's
Wow.
in 10 months. Yeah.
Well, that is a recent one, so that's easily found. The thing, too, and we talk about this, and I always think, we talked about the stigma, and before we were on here, we talked about that, and that's certainly something that it changes. I hope it's changing because it certainly often prevents people from seeking treatment, prevents people from talking about it, from being honest about it. And I think years ago, mental health, mental illness, there was a stigma about that. And go back 50, 60 years, and nobody talked about that. Now, certainly that's opened up, and certainly that's more accepted, and all kinds of people have therapists and freely talk about, I am seeing my therapist. Well, if you talked about that 50 years ago, they would have looked at you sideways, right? And there's an old movie, and I don't know why I think of this, but there's an old movie that I love the movie. It was called King's Row, and it's Ronald Reagan's in it, and a few others.
Oh, that is an old movie.
It is a very old movie, but it's anyway. The theme of the movie is about the early stages of psychiatric treatment.
Okay.
And there's all kinds of aspects about that, and how that was hidden, and how that evolved, and how there was one person who said, "We have to bring this out. We have to talk about this." Yeah, and it's so all those
that
years
is
ago.
So
but
ironic because of Reagan is the war on drugs. Reagan is like the whole oh man, right?
I know. Yeah.
What they did to society around addiction was they messed it up, man. Like the Reagan era, the war on drugs crap was just, that's ironic that he did that movie of all things, because, the stigma that they've created around addiction is still, it's here to this day, right? Right. So the war on drugs doesn't work. We know that now.
That didn't have the effect, the intended effect, did it? Yeah.
No.
So here we are 50 years later, and why I even mention that is it reminds me, it equates to the fact that changed, and so can this, right?
And I feel it's changed a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Unfortunately, that moral model that kind of surrounds addiction, we're still there.
Mm-hmm.
I've got someone in my very close to me. I got to be careful how I say that. Who's still stuck in that way of thinking, and it's frustrating, and it's hurtful sometimes, right? And it's caused some pretty big rifts between us. And oh man, I get so frustrated with it. I think realistically, we're a generation away from addiction being normalized the way that mental health is now. Mm-hmm. I think we're probably still maybe half a generation away from that, if that makes sense, right? Because there's a lot of crap still stuck from, people wanting to keep it secret. And I get it. Some people want to keep, but just think about why. Why do you want to keep it secret? I don't keep a broken leg secret. I don't hide that from people, right? But I want to hide my addiction from people, or my history with addiction, right? Because of the stigma, 100% because of the stigma,
right?
And I remember going through a bout of depression a few years back, and how I was able to, I took some pills and I felt so much better, and it did, it helped. But having to, when I talked about it, it was it was a thing. It was a thing that I was actually openly talking about depression and how I had taken these pills. And that was 5 years ago, man. Right. So we've got some work to do. We do. Right. And I'm done. I'm done keeping it secret. I see what it does to people. I felt that hurt, that perceived lack of connection, me believing that my family didn't want me around was the boot on my neck for the last 2 years of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we just have to do better. We have to normalize it. We have to let people know that it's okay to come out and talk about it. And you know, if your kids got it, talk about it. Because I guarantee you there's a mother there's another soccer mom, there's somebody else in the room who wishes to hell she would talk about it. She could talk about it. So until we start doing it, you know, right? So yeah.
And you find if somebody can relate to it, or somebody else who's gone through it, it's then that's when somebody will pour out and say,
right,
"Oh, you can
right.
relate, you understand."
Can you imagine the sense of like what that must feel like to a mom, for instance, right? Which is what you're doing is part of the reason I love what you're doing, Mike, right? Is because you've taken those family stories and you're sharing them. And to me, it's a big part of what we do here now. And that's exactly why, right? Because I can tell you the feedback I get from the people that listen to our show are so thankful. You know, I wish we would have heard about your show. I wish there was a community like yours around 20 years ago. I wish. And you're doing the same thing. And I absolutely love that about what you're doing, Mike. And that's, you know, right.
And so, the families, because, and believe me, I'm like most people. And this is one of the things that I've learned, and partly why we're doing this, because no, I will say I'm not in recovery myself. However, too many people that I care about have lost their lives. Too many people in my family have gone through addiction. I've seen it. I've been close to it. My best friend shot himself in the head under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Yeah. And it's just too close to home. And I didn't know what I didn't know. And the more I was learned about this, I'm like, oh my goodness, wow. If I had known this, if my friend or family member had known this, if we had only approached this differently.
Right.
So when
and can I ask you why? Why didn't you know? Why didn't they know? What if you had to pick one reason? What is it?
Why? Because I didn't have a reason to. I didn't have a reason
Stigma.
to know. And
but
only
why didn't they know?
I did have a reason, but I didn't know it.
But you know why you didn't know? There's a stigma.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
The whole thing is stigma. It all comes back to that. Mm-hmm. It always comes back to that, right? So yeah.
And I think in the book that I had written, I think we might have talked about this, called Voices from the Fallen, where it's 8 different stories, and most important aspect of that book, I think, is in the 8 stories, there's family perspectives. What the mother was thinking or doing.
100% that is in my mind, right?
The interaction.
Yeah, right.
Yep. So you get that perspective and how it affects them. And of course, it's like there's, call it 100,000 overdose deaths last year in the United States.
Yeah.
Well, that's how many people did that death affect? Well, 10, hundreds.
I love that you're asking that
billions
question.
Of people that this affects.
I love that you're asking that question because
Yes.
I asked the same one over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
I give an arbitrary number of 10, knowing that it's very low.
All right.
10 to 1, 10 for every addict, right? Knowing that number is low, very low. When's the last time you went to a funeral with 10 people at it?
Right.
You know, right? It doesn't happen, right? Especially for a young person. So many young people, right? But even at 10, right? That's 100,000 people, or that's 1 million people affected, right? Mm-hmm. That's 1 million people. So a 747 falls out of the sky every single day. That's how many people die of overdose.
Right.
What would happen if it were anything else?
Right.
COVID never even got close to those numbers. Not even close to those numbers.
No.
And the world shut down. Why aren't we doing something? Stigma. That's why. Fucking stigma. You know.
That's a good part of it.
Right.
Big part of it.
It's yeah, right.
And partly why what we have a lot of different people on our show who, people who share their stories like yourself, people who work in care providers. We have community leaders. We have our own state senator who talked about the programs he's initiating, but also his story of recovery. And that's why I mention it and why he's on to get rid of, to reduce that stigma, to say, look, here I am talking about this. And I think with the stories and what we talk about, and my big purpose, and the word I use a lot, is I want my program and my book to be relatable. So people say, yeah, I see that. I see us in that person.
Absolutely.
I had the same issue, the same concerns. It has to be relatable for people to connect to it.
100%. 100%. It does, right? So yeah, and we try every day. That's the community that we're trying to build here, right? Is and to normalize it. And one of the things that, as somebody who's podcasting, a growing podcast like we both are, what I feel have the responsibility to do, even if you want to call it that, certainly a calling for me anyway, is connecting people now.
Yes.
Because you've got so many people, so every day, your show's growing, my show's growing, right? But we have the ability now to connect people whose stories are similar. But more than that, we have, hey, you know what? You're in LA. I got a guy in LA who I talk to sometimes. He might be able to help you out with that, right? Or you're in Florida, or you're in. So that's one of the areas that I try really hard to do, right? I've got my interventionist buddy down in Florida, my sponsor treatment or my sponsor Yatra treatment centers in Thailand. I've got a recovery house and a treatment center in Vancouver, and it's about, hey man, if we can help. One of our listeners is in South Africa. She called me looking for Narcan. Well, now I'm calling my buddy in Thailand trying to get her some Narcan into South Africa, or like. To be able to do that, to be able to connect people to me, I love being able to do that and maybe see some results, right? So yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff, right? Yeah.
And I think you and I we'll connect on a few other connections that we each have, because I got some people that I think would be very interested in your program.
Right.
And I want to jump back a little bit, because you said about 2 years ago when you started thinking about getting sober.
Okay. Yeah.
What was it that made you finally say, all right, I've had enough of this? And attached to that question is, was it just yourself, or was there an instrumental person who helped you get there?
Okay. What drove me to it was exhaustion, pure exhaustion. Like, the fun had gone. I by this time, I had screwed up so much, I wasn't dealing drugs anymore, or at least I wasn't, not in any sort of meaningful way. It was Christmas. I was alone in a basement, hiding from a friend's family because I wasn't supposed to be there. I was cold. I was hungry. I was tired. And I just said, enough, like I can't do this anymore. And I texted my mom, and my mom, for those months, we had started communicating again. And no matter how erratic my conversations with her were, and if you've talked to anybody with a loved one in addiction or any addict, they'll tell you about all sorts of erratic conversations and crazy things, right? It always ended with, you are loved. My mom made sure I knew that all the time. She would say it to me randomly in messages. You are loved. You are loved. And that's why it's a big part of the brand here. It's under the logo. In that text balloon specifically, because I got that a lot from her. So when I had enough, when I was done, I knew she was there. Mm-hmm. So I reached out to her and said, you know what, Mom, like, I can't do this anymore. And I got to tell you, man, a few hours later, she picked me up. She lived about an hour away in another small city. She picked me up. I had an apartment. She had, and I say an apartment, I mean, it was a 1-bedroom with zero furniture, zero anything in it. We had to go get a mattress from another apartment and bring it in and put it on the floor when I got there. But I had a safe, warm place to be, to start to figure things out. And I could start living again, right? Within hours of me making that call to my mom. That was when I first started to get sober. Recovery is not linear. Getting to sobriety is not linear. Relapses happen. People need to be, aware of that and patient of that if you have someone in your life, because it's just not. A relapse is almost guaranteed. I always hear the number 7, that was my 7th attempt. And I'm not sure what my count was. It seems to me it was somewhere around 7, right? Okay. Relapses before I finally got there. But my mom, throughout all of that, loved. She just loved, right? She's the one who suggested a podcast. She's the daily gratitudes that we do inside every episode. That comes from Mom. You know, that's 100% comes from mom. You know, she basically hit me upside the head with a journal on my last relapse and said, yeah, you're doing your daily gratitudes now. So enough of that, right? Like, I'm not taking this from you anymore. You're going to start listing them off. So, because it's a big part of recovery, right? You need something positive to hold on to, because times get shitty and desperate when you're in it, right? When you first start recovering. The "You Are Loved" message comes from mom. She has been instrumental in so much of my recovery and the show and all the things, right? And now there's mothers from all over the country and all over North America that reach out to mom.
Wow.
To my mom, because, you know, she's been on the show. She makes no secret about, you know, who she is. Chuck LaFlange isn't even my real name. My real name's Chris Horder, but you know, like, that was just because of the way things started, right? But so Chuck LaFlange is, you know, it's my stage name now, and it's an identity that I've just started to use, and here we are, right? But my mom makes no secrets about who she is, and people constantly reach out to her because she's like, yeah, mom, right? 46 years old, and I'm more of a mama's boy than I ever was.
You know? Well, that's fantastic. That's wow.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
So,
but the whole key to that is knowing you were loved and let's say that wasn't part of it. That might have changed the direction.
yeah. I guarantee. I was at a point where I would carry some fentanyl with me in case today's the day I got the guts to do it. In case today's the day that I got the guts to end it. That's how desperate I was. And I would sell that because I wanted my crack. And I'd get my crack, but then I would feel empty because I didn't have that little bit of fentanyl with me. That's how desperate I was. I never did fentanyl, but I just wanted it with me in case today was the day I got the guts to end it. Right? So without those messages and without knowing that from mom, yeah, there's no way I'm here. There's no way I'm here. Yeah. Right.
God bless your mom.
Right. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. She wasn't so far in Calgary. Is she in Calgary? Or
yeah, no, she's in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. So
okay,
just outside of Regina. Yeah. About 7 hours away from me now. Yeah. So. And
you know,
I should say,
what I think is so. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, the final. So from that point to sobriety was almost a year. My father died.
Oh, sorry. And
thank you. And that was back here in Calgary, and I didn't get here in time. You know, because I got the notice he had cancer and he was dead a very short time later. But the day I got the news that he had cancer, I decided to get sober. I was sober for like 2.5 weeks, and then he passed on the 21st of October. And I got really high that day. Really high, like I drowned all my sorrows in it. But then I woke up the next day and I've been sober since. So the 21st is my day because it coincides with Dad's, right? Yeah. I just thought I got to do better for Dad, right? Yeah. You know, so came back to Calgary for the service, decided I wasn't never going to go back to where I was, you know, and reconnect with all the people that love me, and here I am. So, you know, yeah.
Phenomenal. Mm-hmm. Wow. Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, due to your mom and your dad, you're here, and look at the work you're doing.
Yeah.
And
right.
This is what I love about what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know, you can certainly go through and relate to all the to trauma and all the things that brought you where you are. But look how many people who are listening now, who are hearing your voice talk about this.
Right. You know, and it's kind of got crazy there. The growth just went nuts, right? So yeah.
Yep. And you said it was your mom's idea to do this podcast.
It was. So
yeah. How did that happen?
Back when I first started to get sober, or attempted to get sober, I'd had this blog, and we called it Recovery of LaFlange, right? So, and it was like immediately massively successful. Like on day 5, there was something like 7,000 views. I was just, what the hell happened here, right? To put that in perspective, I've had 7,000 views on like 2 things I've ever done since, right? So like it was like, whoa, right? But I found that I connected. It wasn't so much about connecting with people in recovery. It was about trying to help moms and dads and loved ones find some respite from the guilt and all the things that come with having an addict as a loved one, right? And I found that I was able to connect with them, and that they were the people that were paying attention to my blog towards the end. And I don't get into why that went south for me. You know, I found some resentments and things, and I chose to, step away from that. But when I did get sober, and I'm back in Calgary, and I need to work, but the PTSD is so bad at this point that I can't get on a city bus most days. I am so messed up from the PTSD, right? At this point, it is really, really bad. This is 11 months ago now. I was in bad shape, So my mom's like, well, what would you do if you could do anything? I said, well, I write, but I mess that up for myself now. And I just don't, I don't enjoy that the way I used to. And she said, do you ever think about a podcast? And I never even listened to a podcast, right? Well, like a week and a half later, I got a Windows 7 laptop, no microphone, no headphones. And I'm just blah, blahing into a computer, right? So, and that's where the podcast was born, right? So I was fortunate. I had some friends that were paying attention, and I still remember the first donation I got was it was $100 cash and a $50 Amazon gift card, and I was able to buy a microphone, not this microphone, but I'm still using the same boom to hold that microphone. Mm-hmm. And I it was like, whoa, man, look at this, I got a real microphone now. And it was like all my birthdays come at once, And then slowly since then, of course, I've upped my game a little bit, and I've still got that microphone. I don't think you could peel it from my cold dead hands for what it meant to me, right? But and then my second donation was, and these are people again from years and years and years ago, right? My second donation was $75 e-transfer that I was not expecting from somebody who's still very, very close to me. Actually, I plan on seeing her later on today for coffee, and those things just kicked off a thing, and. I've been able to spread a message and do some great things, So and
it's phenomenal. And I've listened.
We got a long ways to go, but
yeah.
It feels good. It feels good some days.
And just
16 hours a day. Oh, geez, right? But
just you're as I said earlier on, you're pretty busy with this, and a lot of content there. And again, just say where people can find your podcast.
So we're at a2apodcast.com. And of course, we're on all the social media networks as well. It's just search Ashes to Awesome Podcast. We are literally on every social media now. I don't think there's any that we're not on, right? I got on the Snapchat bandwagon recently too. So,
wow.
But yeah, our YouTube channel has all the episodes. But the website's worth checking out because it interlinks everything. We've got the Shattered Stigma Project there, which is something I think that you would really like, Mike. The star of that is a lady out of Brockville, Ontario, Tammy Preston, but it's blog posts from people. So she's got a daughter who's still living it, who's still in the active addiction, and Tammy's sharing her experiences in real time. Mm. And that's some pretty powerful stuff there, right? So, that's at a2apodcast.com. And what she does, Tammy is, she's one of our very first listeners we ever had. I talk to her almost daily, and she's just this beautiful soul, and the ups and downs, and she's raw and she's real the way she shares that, right? So it's something else. But yeah, that's Shattered Stigma Project. Yeah. So
that's incredible. Yeah, I'll tune into that. I think it's worth diving into that. Well, Chuck, listen, we're starting to run out of time. I'm not for me,
I guess so.
But, because I could talk to you all day, So I appreciate you taking time out. And the other thing too is there's so much to talk about. If and so many topics that you cover, I'd love to have you back. We could zero in on a few things.
Anytime,
back again.
Absolutely, anytime. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know how to book me now,
great.
So yeah, right.
Right, I do, and I'm learning a lot from you too. I'm learning a lot from you, so I appreciate that very much.
Anything I could do to help.
Yeah.
If I could help one person not go through the insane learning curves that I've had to go through, just the few things that I'll speak to this real funny, just because it is funny.
Yeah.
For the first 2 months, stumbling around in the dark with my friends, trying to what do I do here? What do I Google this tutorial that blah blah. And one day I was like, I wonder if there's a Facebook group that has something to do with podcasting. Well, it turns out there's a bunch of them with tens of thousands of people, and I could have saved myself all sorts of crazy stuff by just paying attention to that, right? So one of the best connections I made, and I'll do a little plug here for him, was with Scott from the No New Friends podcast. He does a comedy podcast. He's out of Florida. They are just, for adults about adulting, right? And it's like a Seinfeld kind of pod, whatever. It's just about dumb stuff. But he mentored me through so much of what I've learned. And he used to come on the show all the time for that Just a Tips Thursday thing that we do, because he's a comedic genius. So I got to take a break from my ridiculous, or from my insanely serious schedule and just do some dumb stuff, right? So Scott and I would, just have some fun about living in recovery and addiction and all those things, right? So
that's fun, and it breaks it up too. You got to break up the normal routine.
Right.
Well, good. Well, great. Well, it was great having you.
And likewise,
And
it's
also,
great to be on. So,
also, with all the people listening, we appreciate it. Tune into our website, healingvoicesproject.org. We appreciate everybody listening here. Thanks again for joining us, and thanks again, Chuck. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. All right.
I'm not.
Okay.
I'll end the recording. I can end the recording here, right? And we can still talk.
Absolutely, you can. Yeah, you definitely want to before I leave.